please take the roll.
Hopkins,
Here.
Blackmer,
Here.
Bona,
Here.
Harpen,
Here.
LaForest,
Here.
Lamb,
Here.
Moulton,
Here.
Sweeney,
Here.
Wilkinson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for a moment of silence, remembering Donald Reset, employee of the North Adams Wastewater Treatment Plant. And the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Approval of the minutes of our meeting of December 26, 2019. Motions in order to approve.
Motion to approve as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Abstain.
One abstention.
There should be
Three
three
abstentions.
abstentions.
Oh,
Correct.
yeah.
Thank you. In the hearing of visitors, if anyone would care to speak to the council this evening, you have 2 minutes. Please let me know by raising your hand first, and then we'll ask you to come to the mic and state your name and address for the record. Mr. Smith?
I'm Robert Smith. I live at 140 Pleasant Street. In regards to Councilors Harpen and LaForest, I understand you're trying to get this issue on 11840 resolved tonight. You mentioned about your constituents, but just remember, I'm a constituent also. My neighbors are your constituents. So are my friends who meet for coffee every morning who are your constituents. All right, so there's two sides to this. The 400 signature thing that was collected, if you look at it, 80 of those signatures were not signed by people who live in this city. 120 went on Facebook, never left an address, never signed. So that gets you below 200. There's more important things in this city than to worry about this artwork. The point being that under those pillows, a lot of people can't see that artwork. It's also a hazard for drivers if they get distracted. Now, if you had attended the meeting last night at the Public Arts Commission, you would have realized that there was discussion in reference to having artwork done by students again, but put in a more visible area of the city where most people will see it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Morandi.
Yeah, Ed Morandi, West Shaft Road. And again, in regards to 11840, I think the problem we have here is this has been bouncing around since, what, 2017? And I'd like to remind the council, I don't think I have to remind anyone, but some of the people in the audience, this council makes the laws for this city. And it's not right for someone, whether it be the town administrator, the mayor, a councilor on their own, to give somebody the right to do something. And when Mass Mocha covered up the art that was on the pillars, they did it without recognition. They did not have an okay to do it. They just went out and did it. So just a reminder, there was 500 people on that petition that came before the councilor. There was a lot of people who called in on my show that liked the art that was there before and wished it could be put back on. The art that was there come from the 1840s, from the Arnold Print Works, which was now, ironically, what Mass Mocha occupies. And in fact, I don't know if there's documentations that gave Mass Mocha the right to use them pillars in the beginning. I think it was just an okay given by a previous administration. So I think you people do not have to go out to put this on the ballot, but I think you can make a decision yourself because you are the ruling body of this city.
Thank you. Any others wishing to be heard? Ms. Buckley.
Fran Buckley. I live at 231 North Street, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the order, excuse me, that Councilors Harpin and LaForest presented to you that you're looking at tonight. I don't know whether you saw some of those renderings that were on the pillars. They were absolutely gorgeous. I remember standing there looking at them and just taken by them. I just couldn't walk away for a while. We know that it became a point of destination in this community. Many parents brought their kids down to see what other kids had done in the work of art. Now, the teacher that led them not only gave them an art lesson, but she provided a history lesson. And our kids get too little of history today in school. Anyway, I'm asking you tonight to vote yes on that order. All they're asking is to have a small portion of paint removed. It's supposedly anti-graffiti paint, which when it's removed, what is underneath it will come through. So we're all hoping that something will come through. But please vote yes on tonight's order. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address the room? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, if you'd state your name and address for the record when you get to the mic.
Hello, my name is Tom Ryan from 530 Nuts Road. Everybody knows me. I'd like to say, get something off my chest. I had a problem. I went up to see the mayor. The mayor gave me the runaround. He says, if you got a problem, you go see my department heads. Well, probably that's some of the problem, but I said to the mayor, Mayor, aren't you the CEO of North Adams? Don't you have the final say? Aren't you the boss? He said, if you've got a problem, go see my department heads. So I got thrown out of the mayor's office. Okay, I had a problem today. I called the department head early this morning. I waited all day long. The department head didn't call me back. And when you do talk to a department head, which I did a couple of months ago, all I got was lies and baloney.
Careful.
Baloney. Well, I'm sorry, but I pay $5,000 a year for taxes in North Adams. Who the hell do I talk to if I got a problem?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mr. Smith, I believe, is next.
Well, my name is Joseph Smith. I live at 131 Horgan Road in Clarksburg. I also own a house in North Adams, so I'm a North Adams taxpayer. I'm here for the very popular subject so far. I wanted to just highlight a couple things that I think maybe haven't risen to the surface so much with this that I thought I'd just highlight. One thing is that the mural artists have agreed in the past to having only a short-term restoration. The idea of 1 to 3 years was put forth by them, which really should remove any reasonable dispute because at that point things could just return as they were after some time for the community to enjoy the art again, if it can be restored. Another matter is that the sound installation artists have never directly been asked their position by any city entity that the public is aware of. Instead, the city seems to have taken the word of a third party throughout, which is clearly improper on its face. In the information packet that you guys have tonight, that I read the PDF of, there's a letter from the Public Arts Commission Chair to Councilor Harpin saying that this was considered not a matter in their purview as a commission, at least previously, which lends credence to the fairness of the matter coming to City Council. The mural artists have also agreed that should a restoration test fail, that would be the end of their pursuit on the matter. And let's be honest, with passing additional seasons, that's much more probable at this point anyway. Another thing that I wanted to mention was that when was the last time that the city had a petition this large? We can subtract off some numbers for Facebook or We can say that people who are maybe visitors who enjoy the city but aren't residents shouldn't count as much, whatever way we want to view this. The bottom line is that the last time we had a petition of anything near this size was probably when we were talking about CVS in St. Francis. And I'd like to point out in that case, a mega corporation actually listened. And I think that we should really take note of the fact that if nobody's going to listen on a petition this large, and it's just going to continue spinning in a mire of nobody taking any action,
Thank you.
that's a problem.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. I saw another hand up. Mr. Sapienza.
Yes, Brian Sapienza, 113 Pleasant Street. I'm also a member of the Public Arts Commission, but I'm speaking as a citizen, not as a representative of the Public Arts tonight. As much as I would like to see the artwork restored on the pillars, we felt that the restoring the art on the pillars could also possibly damage it, and it could also be very costly to do it properly. And I'm just wondering where the council thinks that they will pull the money from, because the Public Arts Commission does not have a budget. We have a $0 budget, nothing at all. And asking the Public Arts Commission to perform the testing and subsequent removal would be basically impossible for the fact that we don't have the money. If the city council is willing to find us the money and do it, that would be a different situation. But basically, I feel that and I've given, at a Public Arts Commission meeting, I gave a suggestion that the art be reproduced on panels that could be attached to the side of the bridge. Namely, this would make the artwork more visible for traffic passing along Route 2, Route 8, Marshall Street. It would be a more visible position. I know the lighting underneath the bridge is not the best day or night. At night, the lighting under the bridge is a sodium vapor light. They produce very yellow light, and they also tend to change the colors of the artwork. So if you view the artwork at night, you're not viewing it in the best light. I feel that above the bridge with other lighting, ambient lighting, I think that would be a much better situation. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other hands, thank you all. There is, of course, another opportunity to speak at the end of our meeting in open forum. Moving into our regular agenda now, item number 11,838, Mayor's Communication number 1, requesting time for Stantec to present a study of downtown parking. I've asked Zach Fury from the Community Development Office to get us started.
Thank you, Council President Hopkins. May it please the council. In fiscal year 2019, the city applied for and received from the Department of Housing and Community Development's Massachusetts Downtown Initiative a grant to perform a comprehensive study of parking in the downtown area. That area is a roughly 60-acre area bounded to the west by Mass MoCA, down to Heritage State Park, around Steeple City Plaza, extending out into the residential neighborhood to the east, up by the library, and then bordered by River Street to the north. The study was intended to take a look at the parking inventory, utilization, and regulations within the downtown. This grant enabled the city to contract with Stantec, a very large, very well-reputed planning firm. And with us tonight is Liza Cohen, a transportation planner with Stantec, who served as the project manager for this study. And with that, I'd like to bring her up to perform the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. As Zach said, my name is Liza Cohen. I work for Stantec. I've been doing parking work for almost 10 years now, all around the country. But I really love working in small, historic New England downtowns, so it was really fun to work on this study. Tonight, I'm going to walk through, at a very high level, some of our findings and what we're thinking for recommendations. There's a lot more detail than what you'll see here. Tried to keep it short. I promise parking can be a little bit exciting, but you only want to hear about it for so long. So overall, we started off the study, as Zach mentioned, with a variety of goals that range from just documenting what you have on the ground, what your parking supply is, and what the demand for that supply is. Coming up with recommendations to improve the system for everybody that uses the downtown.
I'm sorry, the mic is sensitive to direction, so if you can point it more towards you, and that's exactly right.
How's
Thank
that?
you.
It's for the people at home.
Okay. Sorry, people at home. In addition to those goals, you can read the rest of these here, but generally looking to add some flexibility to your system to support future and current downtown development. So we kicked off our process this summer with our data collection on the ground. We worked through a quick public outreach session, and we're now at the end here with a final report and presentation, and here to kind of check strategies and make sure that they make sense with you all. So what did we find? We went out and step one was to count all of the spaces. So this is a map of all of the spaces in your downtown. This is City Hall right here, Main Street, sorry for my shaky hand, Mass MoCA up in the northwest corner of the study area. And overall, you have about 3,000 parking spaces on the ground, which might sound like a lot. And I'll talk about why that is in a minute. But the other thing to keep in mind is if you were to ask somebody, what is the parking like in downtown North Adams? They might say, oh, it's 2-hour metered on street, 25 cents an hour. When in reality, when I drive into North Adams as a visitor, this is the system that I'm presented with. Each of these colors represents a different parking regulation. So the on-street parking regulations are shown with these kind of skinny little lines, and I apologize that it's a little bit hard to see. And the off-street parking regulations based on signage and the perception of a visitor are shown with all of these different colors. So you have about 20 to 30 different parking regulations in your downtown. Uh-oh. It's back. There we go. So you have 3,000 parking spaces, and about 300 of those are on street, the remainder are off street. But importantly, of course, this is the perception right now, you know, most of the on-street parking is open to anyone, again, from the perspective of a visitor. Most of the off-street parking is actually restricted. And so basically what that means is it doesn't have a big blue P or something to indicate that it's open to the public. And if you think about the way that your system works price-wise, what you have right now is this kind of core priced area that's 25 cents an hour with the shortest time limit, which makes sense. You know, that's where you want kind of most of your turnover. And then moving further out, you have some free but time-limited parking in the Mountain One lot, some other priced parking around the edges that maybe has some longer time limits. So one of the questions that we always ask is, does this match up to demand? Are the highest price, shortest time limit areas where most of the demand is? So in order to figure that out, we went out and we counted all the cars in all the spaces. And it's important to note that we counted all spaces in the downtown, right? Publicly accessible, private, restricted. We wanted to get the full picture of parking demand to understand where the crunch areas are. And here's what we found. So this map on the left is showing your peak time of day, which we found to be in the middle of the day at around noon. And it's a heat map. So off-street parking and on-street parking that's shown in orange or red is parking that's full. There's not really any spaces available, and it's shown by block face here on Main Street, for example. Mass MoCA at noon, very busy. Some spaces on Main Street, very busy. The parking that's shown in green is what we consider to be efficiently utilized. So about 1 or 2 in every 10 spaces is available. So kind of up one of the Mass MoCA overflow lots. And then everything shown in blue, various colors of blue, is parking that today is underutilized. So it's 60% or fewer occupied cars. So that's the map on the left. And we have a map for the 4 time periods for which we collected data. On the right is a chart that shows those 4 time periods. So those are across the bottom here on the x-axis, and then percent occupancy is on the y-axis. Overall, the dark red shows the number of parked cars in your downtown, and the blue shows the number of empty spaces. So at your peak, your parking overall is only about 40% utilized. Don't know why that keeps happening. So this is that chart again on the left. of course, that's not the condition when you start to drill down to specific areas. So we took a look at Eagle Street, which is getting up towards that 80 to 90% sort of well-utilized, pretty busy number that we look for, and Main Street, which this includes East Main Street as well, but things are pretty busy throughout the day, which is probably what most of you experience. Those are probably the most popular parking spaces. So altogether, our inventory, again, 3,000 spaces. Right now, a certain subset of those are open to the public. Many of your off-street parking facilities today are what we would consider unregulated, so there's no sign either way, but they're not necessarily very obvious to somebody like me visiting from elsewhere. There are some places like Eagle Street and Main Street and the Mass MoCA parking where you might have a parking crunch, but there's almost always availability nearby. And so one of the goals of the study is to think about how can you more efficiently use the parking supply that you have on the ground, and we'll come back to that. One other thing we took a quick look at was what we call the multimodal conditions. So what's it like to walk, to bike, to do something else to get around downtown Pittsfield, or I'm sorry, not Pittsfield, North Adams. I was in Pittsfield this morning. To get around downtown North Adams, and what's it like to come to downtown North Adams on a bike or on foot. And one of the things that kept getting pointed out to us again and again, particularly when we spoke to people who actually live and work downtown, is the walking barriers that the two main streets that crisscross your downtown create today. So we documented that in a bit more detail. So getting to our public process, we held some stakeholder meetings in October, and we spoke to a lot of different folks who have a direct interest in parking, be it local churches, Mass MoCA, the police department, schools. We also had an opportunity for people to drop in and talk with us, the consultant team. And we're now in this second stage where we've talked a little bit with the city about our draft recommendations, and we're here to hear from you. So what did we hear? We heard that downtown doesn't necessarily feel super walkable today, that there's a desire for what's called a park once environment. So people would like to park their car and then visit multiple destinations downtown as opposed to driving between destinations. That there's been some development proposed or talk of changes in the downtown that will increase visitors and attention, and generally the city wants to be prepared for that. And overall, there's this kind of perception that your downtown currently might have too much parking, and some of that land could be used for something else. We also took a quick look at your zoning to think about what in the code today supports flexible downtown development and what might be standing in the way. And these are some of the kind of high-level takeaways here, but you've got some kind of high parking minimums, some impediments to sharing some of the parking that already exists. And another key piece of this, and I won't go too far into detail with this totally thrilling parking chart, is thinking about the future demand. So what this chart is showing is time of day is across the bottom here, and number of parking spaces is up and down the y-axis. One thing that we know about parking is that it's not a straight line demand, right? So if I own a bank, I don't need, or I don't have the same number of people parked outside my bank all day, because sometimes it's busier than others and sometimes my bank is completely closed. So what this model does is it actually takes each of those uses and what's called the demand profile, so you know what I was saying about the bank, for all these different uses, and piles them on top of each other to create an understanding of real parking demand in your downtown. And remember how I said we counted all of the cars in all the spaces? What's nice about that is that we can take our model, and that's what these bar charts are doing on top of it, and compare it to what we actually observed in your downtown and see that it's a pretty good fit. So we did all of that to understand what your potential is for new development based on your existing parking system. And this is not to say that every single one of your 3,000 spaces could go towards supporting new development, but we wanted to understand what that meant overall in terms of the parking that's available. So we ran one scenario using this model, which is to say, what would happen if 100 additional housing units were to come into your downtown, and if some of your spaces that today maybe aren't fully occupied were to be slightly more occupied. And you know, we'll put the details of this in the report, but overall we found that your parking demand would increase by about, 400 cars, which still leaves a significant number of spaces available to support additional development. One thing I want to point out here is those 100 housing units. You can see the demand for those in pink here. is, you know, much greater at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and less so in the middle of the day when people are at work. So this is pointing to opportunities to maybe share parking spaces throughout the downtown. Okay, enough about zoning. Here's what we came up with for strategies. So we have 8 of these, and I'll rocket through them. But the first is to promote what's called shared parking agreements. So there are a lot of different forms of shared parking. The most basic is to take a restricted, privately owned parking lot and say, this is underutilized throughout the day, so we're gonna allow the public to park here. But there are lots of shades of that. You could, for example, coordinate an agreement between 2 businesses who have complementary uses. So I'll use my bank example again, and a restaurant. They might be able to share a couple of parking spaces. You could use some of these underutilized lots to support special events in the downtown. So, you know, once or twice a year when you have a big festival, now you know where maybe parking demand is not so high, could capitalize on that to support a special event. So again, there's tons of permutations of shared parking agreements, but we think that the city can take an active role in helping to tap into some of this parking that exists but is underutilized today. There are a number of ways to do that, to incentivize folks to open up their parking as opposed to just being good Samaritans. And one of the great things is that you're the city, so you have a lot of equipment and services that you're already providing, and you can simply extend some of those to these property owners to incentivize them to open up their property. You know, down the road, that can be in the form of revenue sharing agreements as well. One key thing that you can do is to keep sample agreements, which we will give you on file at City Hall, so that some of the questions that I'm sure are popping up in a lot of your heads right now around liability and who's going to maintain the parking are sort of thought through, and you have a model for how to do this. We think there's room to provide more and better information on parking, so we created this kind of rough draft of a more publicly accessible map of where parking is. And importantly, it sort of points out that Main Street might be short-term parking, you have some mid-term parking in the Mountain One lot, and then potentially long-term parking at the St. Anthony's lot. What's important about this is making sure that this is streamlined so businesses throughout the downtown are pointing to one place for people to get their parking information as opposed to having to create their own from scratch. We think there's room to upgrade your zoning to encourage the type of downtown-friendly development that you would like to see. So that's things like allowing parking facilities to serve buildings that maybe aren't on the exact same parcel. You can use the data that's contained within this study to support some of these ideas. You can waive parking requirements for buildings that are below a certain size so that you don't prevent something that you want to have happen in your downtown on a good downtown scale just because of the parking requirement. And starting to think about maybe becoming more multimodal and requiring developers to provide things like bicycle parking in addition to places for people to store vehicles. We talked a little bit about the barriers that some of your wide streets create and, you know, cutting off some parts of downtown from others. We think there's room for improvements on Main Street, and some of those can be very short term. So we love stuff like this, which is just paint on the ground, and this is kind of a fancy bollard, you know, sort of up and down element that would prevent cars from taking this corner too quickly. This also has the added benefit of just shortening crossing distances, the time when people are in a conflict zone with vehicles. Similarly, once everybody who parks a car gets out of that car and becomes a pedestrian, right? You have to walk to wherever it is that you're going. And so the more that you can work on these sort of small connections throughout your downtown, the more that parking will feel that much closer to where you're going and your parking system starts to open up. We also think there's room to improve the bicycle facilities that you have today so that maybe people choose to take a bike and, you know, take their car out of circulation once or twice. So we also looked at trying to create availability in those key spaces in your core along Main Street and Eagle Street. And the first step to doing that is creating some longer term parking opportunities. So overall, the target that you're going for, again, is up here, is that 85% occupancy. That represents a parking asset that has availability for those who need it and is a good use of land because it's being well used. So one option is to think about making the St. Anthony's lot, which is the one across from Mass Mocha today, free or provide very low cost permits to use that as kind of an overflow long-term location. Encourage, we say employee / long-term use of that lot. And to consider longer time limits for the Center Street lot, maybe more in the 4-hour range. Just to, if you think back to that diagram, to kind of rationalize your system and make sure that you've got, your best parking is also your most expensive, and then work outward from there. So similarly, with that 85% occupancy rate, you can adjust the price as needed to create that rate. So there might be room to, as you continue to monitor and adjust using this data as a baseline, there might be room to increase the price, to create some availability on Main Street and Eagle Street for folks going to the shops and restaurants there, and encourage people who maybe need to park for longer or more frequently to park in some of the outer lying lots. This also, I should mention, goes hand in hand with the strategy to open up some of that underutilized but privately held parking today, where you could use that as well as kind of a cheaper but slightly further away option. There's certainly room to enhance the experience of parking in some of your off-street lots. So that's everything from, this is on Google. As I said, I was in Pittsfield earlier today, and I noticed that actually they had worked with Google to get their public parking lots noted on there. So when you search for parking in Pittsfield, that's what pops up. You've got this excellent wayfinding in downtown, and you can tag onto that to help people find parking, not only when they're driving and looking for parking, but also once they've gone to wherever it is that they're going, when they're looking to find their car again. You want to make sure they know how to get back to the lot. So this is Pittsfield. I think this is a great example where they've put their parking lots onto what is their sort of citywide wayfinding signage. And finally, there's room to upgrade your parking technologies. So today, people really don't mind paying for parking as long as they can pay for parking and it's not a frustrating experience. So increasing the ways in which people can pay for parking is a great way to lower that barrier, lower that hurdle. There are new meters out there that take cards and coins. Parking apps are really nice because you can actually extend your parking time without having to go back to the meter. And once it's all built into your phone, you only have to do it once. So that's it. Those are our 8 strategies, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you all have. And just a reminder, these were the goals that guided us as we worked through this study.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions from councilors? Councilor Moulton?
Yes, through the chair. Maybe I misunderstood, or you can explain. You were saying 100 housing units would extrapolate to 400 cars?
It was 100 housing units and higher occupancy of some of the other commercial uses that you have in the downtown. So it wasn't just the housing.
Okay.
But yeah, point taken, that commercial bump would bump up what's your peak today, right? So because it would occur in the middle of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor LaForest?
Through the chair, so I know this is not the purview of the study, but is there a recommendation or a presumption that some of this excess parking would be naturalized and turned into usable green space for the community?
I think that's a great, I think the broader question, that's a great way of thinking about it. The broader question is, now that you know that your parking is about 40% utilized, do you still want all of that land to be devoted to parking, or do you want it to be literally anything else? Green space, more buildings, anything really.
Sorry, Councilor Lamb?
Just because I know it's a question that is probably coming up in some people's minds. When we do have large downtown events, so Motorama is a prime example, right? We bring 500 to 700 cars into downtown. Were those kind of major events where we do see potentially closer to a 85% utility, were those sort of taken into account when looking at this, or was it sort of just considered an outlier in the grand scheme of things?
So our data collection we try to do on a typical day, and we're trying to plan for a typical day very much. So we're not planning for New Year's Day, we're not planning for Motorama. That's a choice for you all to make. If that's what you want to build your downtown around, then you might make different choices than some of the things that we've outlined here today.
Thank you.
Terrific. Other questions? Councilor Bona?
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the parking app at the very end. That is something I brought to the council a few years ago, and, you know, it's something, there's some easy ways to do that. You can put stickers on your existing meters and not have to spend a whole lot of money, so that is something I think we could do pretty easy. When you looked at the study and counted some of the cars, and did you do a variety of days? Because, I mean, there's days, for example, Mocha might be slow, might be closed versus not Wilco size events, but just there's days that they're definitely busy. I think even the juvenile court that's downtown, that there are 2 days that the lot is always overfull, just because of adoptions and things like that. So I didn't know, when you came up with these percentages of when lots are full, did you take an average of certain seasons, certain days, or did you just go out and do it like?
So the data itself is from 1 day, and we worked with the city to choose a typical day, right? So we made sure there wasn't a major event or construction or anything like that. The reason why we use that 85% target range is to account for some of that fluctuation, right? It's not perfect. It doesn't plan for the special event, but it does account for the days when maybe things are slightly busier or when things might be slightly less busy, kind of instead of planning for 100% occupancy, which sometimes you're going to have more than that.
I mean, I would say, as a retailer downtown, it is consistently inconsistent. It really is. You know, one Friday it's crazy busy. Next Friday there's no one. One Tuesday it's dead. You know, so that's a hard one to predict. The other thing here is you mentioned about St. Anthony's lot possibly being free or discounted with permits. I thought it already was. I thought it already had sort of a discounted permit rate, but I could be wrong. But and that is, I thought, was to be an incentive to get businesses over there. And as for the shared parking, how would the city, again, is this sort of contracts with the developers to say, you know, we're going to open your spots? And again, if I was owning a property, just again, knowing how inconsistent things are, it'd be a hard one for me to predict and say, well, yeah, come down on Tuesdays, no one's using the lot, because it really does changes from day to day. So, but I didn't know, like, is it a contract deal or just an agreement?
Well, so to your first question about the St. Anthony's lot, we can check on the permits. There are meters in there today, which we just don't think are doing much these days, and they might in the future. So that's why one thing to consider in terms of making the lot free versus continuing to have those low-cost permits is once you make it free, it's going to be pretty hard to unmake it free. So that's just something to consider as you're weighing that idea. To the point about shared parking, there are 1,001 ways to do it. And yeah, some of it could be just a signed agreement between two parties. So you mentioned development. That would be, you know, something that maybe the city keeps on file. Some zoning codes actually require you to have a study done and have an agreement in place. You know, there's a number of permutations. And then there's more informal ways to do it. You can say, hey, you can park when my business is closed, so at 5 o'clock or, you know, before 4 o'clock, whatever it is. You could work with the person next to you to, I believe they did this in West Concord. There were 4 merchants who worked with the city to put their lots together and actually restripe it so they could fit more people in there and kind of manage it as one lot. So that's another way that this could work. So there's a ton of different permutations. Does that help answer your question?
A little bit, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Blackmer.
I have several points. So one, I saw, you didn't mention it, but I saw it quickly, and it was the remove the angled parking. And I think that was a recommendation to put that in that goes back to the Hyatt Palmer report or one of the things that we did with Downtown Development, Inc. back in the late 90s. It took us forever to get it. It increased parking spaces. It slowed traffic down on the street, and it also is a lot easier to park in angled, and particularly with everybody having an SUV, it's harder to parallel park, and a lot of people don't know how to do it. So I was kind of surprised me. What about winter parking? Because one thing that happens with all these lots is if you get snowstorm after snowstorm, the snow, you know, removing the snow from the parking lot is not a huge priority when you've got to remove it from the streets. And so we lose parking places there. We also have options for, because people aren't supposed to be parked on the street, they sometimes have options, at least in emergencies or in long storms, to park in our lots. So did you take any of that into, because you did your parking in September and August, which obviously, God help us if there's snow then. So questions about that. And also, one of the comments, the Center Street parking lot / the Mountain One parking lot, I remember the former mayor who worked there said that their back door, the door into that parking lot, was where the majority of their traffic came from. So a lot of that parking back there, I think, is somewhat transitional. They come in, they do their banking for 20 minutes. Maybe they do something else quickly downtown, but because I told them, I said, we wanted more traffic on the street. I said, well, close your back door so that they have to come in the front door, which means they have to go into local businesses. They didn't agree to that. But I just wondered how much of those kinds of conversations and the demographics were you seeing, that people were parking there all day because they were employees? Were they people who were obviously, maybe they've got Nantucket on there, so they're a visitor? And, kind of how much of that influenced what the parking was like? Do we know that there are, out of the 1,200 people that are parked at noon, are 500 of them employees that work in the downtown?
No, and the reason for that is we don't really find it that useful to figure out who people are. Instead, we try to figure out what type of parking they are looking for, right? Do they want long-term parking? Do they want short-term parking? We don't necessarily care why. And so that's part of some of the thoughts for reorganizing some of the parking management, is creating some options for longer term and keeping some of your shorter term options. For the Mountain One parking lot, there are permit designated spaces, so people who hold permits can stay there for longer, but that middle area that's open to the public today is somewhat underutilized, so we thought there might be room to use that as kind of the 4-hour mark of a midterm stay. For the snow removal question, that's certainly an issue that lots of downtowns grapple with. I think that's a matter, again, of working with some of your underutilized lots today and to use that as emergency parking as necessary, so that your public works can get the snow off of the streets. But then, yes, it certainly becomes an issue for a few days a year when there's snow in spots. So we can look further into that, but you're right, we did not do our counts during a snowy day.
Thanks. Councilor Lamb?
Just a few things that came up as I was listening. I guess the first question, this is probably through the chair to either Zach or even the mayor, or maybe Mike. Next steps. So I know that probably some of these efforts are already sort of in the works in City Hall in terms of developing plans and whatnot. But just curious on how the council should proceed with things along the lines of this, because I think a lot of this is stuff that makes logical sense and is it's a well-developed approach. There's probably some more legwork that needs to be done, but that's just sort of a thing to put out there in terms of like how can we move forward on some of these things, especially the ones that are, low-hanging fruit, I guess. The next piece is just thinking about a traffic study on top of this, and I know this has been a conversation we've had kind of in a rotating manner with the city in recent years around the traffic coming into the city, especially over Crin Highway, and how that starts to flow in with the parking and everything that's happening in terms of the visitor economy, but then also just day-to-day folks coming in and out of the city. And then the third piece here is just thinking about, as we're working on the zoning for the city and how that plays into this as well, since some areas the zoning was cleaned up in a number of ways, so there's more single zone focus areas, especially as you get over towards McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts in that area. So just kind of making sure that as we are thinking about this, that those are other pieces that are sort of brought into play.
Final questions or thoughts? Councilor Bona?
Yep. A couple other things here. One, Mr. Canales, did you happen to see the painted bike path? You can paint a bike path, but the crosswalk was going through it. So, but we've had issues with painted crosswalks. So, let's see. You said you didn't. I guess it's not as important to know who the parkers are, but I feel, and this is only just from my experience watching customers come into my store, that tourists, residents, and workers that work downtown have very different habits. And tourists, especially depending where they come from, if they're coming from the cities, they're used to parking sometimes 5, 10 blocks away. So they'll park where they find a spot. They'll park in private spots, they'll park in reserved spots, they'll park wherever they think they can park, some of them. But they would be probably the ones benefiting the most from the parking signs, because I would think the residents and the workers are gonna be more familiar with where they know they park. If we change it, they would need some training, but after that, they'd be like, this is where the parking spots are. You know, in the 15 years of where my store is now, when the store first opened, our business was 70% residents. Now it's 70% tourists, and I would have to think that demographic, that variable is going to change in 5, 10 years. So I do believe the who does matter a little bit.
Yeah.
And don't forget, you gotta remove some of the parking spots for Zach's music venue.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Great information, lots of great questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Moving on, Mayor's Communication number 2, requesting the transfer of $71,000 from the stabilization account to public services for analysis of the city sewer system. Without objection, we'll file the communication and move on to the order authorizing the mayor to transfer the sum of $71,000 from stabilization to public services, engineering expenses, and contracted services. Motion to adopt the orders in order.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Mayor, would you like to start us off?
Sure, and I'm going to ask Mike to come up to answer a couple questions and to provide a little additional context. The I&I analysis is something that we are obligated to do under state law. It was required as of the end of December 2017. We were doing some additional analysis, and the city has been operating under a waiver in advance of that deadline, and the time now is appropriate to come forward and to do that study. Again, inflow and infiltration basically lays out how water gets into our sewer system from non-sewer sources. So that's from residents, from cracks, leaks, and other deficiencies in the system. And this analysis that Ty and Bond is going to perform is going to give us the understanding, if you will, of the condition of our systems, so that we can address those deficiencies and take corrective action where we need to.
All right, terrific. Questions from the council? Councilor Harpen.
Through the chair to the mayor. It looks like we're going to be doing about 285 building inspections. I'm just wondering, are those random inspections, or are those going to be in certain areas of the city?
So in the report, the Ty and Bond report, they lay out those 285 are properties that were flagged previously that need to be analyzed.
We had the hand up.
That may be
Councilor
part
Bala.
of where my question was going, because, I mean, we've done I&I studies before. And so when you say flagged previously, through those I&I studies, they found that these were problem areas. I'm guessing when you say flagged. And I don't know what the timeline is. I just remember, under the Barrett administration, it was like every other meeting we were talking about I&I, I&I, and I&I. So I don't know, red flagged, is it 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And it has this, and I don't know if the city's ever done any really big projects of, I mean, I know in Williamstown when they dug up Spring Street, I mean, that was to fix a big part of their I&I. So I'm not sure if we're testing just to find what we had issues with before to say, yes, we still have issues with these, or is there an actual plan moving forward?
Well, so the presumption is, first of all, is to address the areas where we know we have known deficiencies, to determine what those are. And then additionally, within that scope of services, talking about, and again, those 285 buildings were the ones going back to the 99 study. And then, so it's the building inspections and then system testing generally to determine what the current condition is.
Councilor Wilkinson, who's next?
I think it's important that people that may not know understand why doing I&I tests are important. We pay by the gallon at the wastewater treatment plant in Williamstown. We split it up with Williamstown. But obviously the more water waste that we send there increases the amount it's going to cost the city. So by reducing the I&I, or the amount of water that gets into our sewer system, as the mayor said, that isn't sewer, it saves the city a lot of money. So that's the purpose of doing this. I think people should know that.
Councilor LaForest and then Harpen.
Through the chair to the mayor, is the purpose of this study, and I certainly support it because there's multiple issues here, is this to correct sort of failed septic systems that are dumping inappropriately either rainwater or
Not some. Go ahead,
excuse me, I was distracted by the gallery. To correct what's known as failed septic systems that are discharging rainwater and sewage into the ground and into the system that empties into the river, or is this to reduce sewage that flows to the sewage treatment plant? Excess water in that sewage?
It's an excess water. So the inflow side of I&I is and this is DEP definition. So is the storm or surface waters entering the sewer system through drains, catch basins, roof letters, manhole covers, and flows from sump pumps. So it's not specifically as you said.
So it's not, if I may, so it's not to correct sewage that's flowing directly into the river. It's to reduce the flow to the.
It's additional inflow of water into the system, either because of, again, deficiencies, cracks, defects in the sewer pipes themselves, or water flowing from, in this case, residential properties into catch basins and into the system in that way.
Okay, just one follow-up. Okay. So the dye testing, just for clarification, isn't to determine if that water and or sewage is flowing into the river, but into the
sewer system,
the general sewer system.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Harpen.
Sure. Through the chair to the mayor. I just want to make sure, and I'm not sure if it was in here. It might have been. Anybody that's going to be inspected, if you're going to residential homes, are they going to be notified? And if they do find an issue at someone's home, are they going to be required to repair it at their cost?
I'm going to let you talk about that part of the process.
Typically, with homes, one of the things that we'll be trying to address is whether or not people take things such as sump pumps, gutters, drains, and other things and put them into their sewer system instead of discharging into their yard or something else. In those cases, any illegal discharging would be identified in these, and then we would deal with those through either Department of Health or Building Department, as far as those need to be disconnected and readjusted to where they should be. Because as Councilor Wilkinson said, we do pay quite a bit to the district to treat our water, and that's why we want to make sure there's no reason for drains, catch basins, sump pumps, or anything else to be running into the sewer system itself.
And can you speak to the notification question?
Yeah, any homes that this will all be notified.
Okay.
As far as individuals, any homes we're going to.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, Councilor LaForest?
Just a quick question through the chair to the mayor or Mr. Canales. Are funds available to assist homeowners with these corrections?
Not through the city.
Councilor Wilkinson.
Then I have to ask the question. You notify a homeowner that you would like to come in and inspect his property because you suspect that there may be a problem in there, and they say no. What happens then? Search warrant? Search warrants?
In those, depending on that, through DEP, if they've been flagged before and we're testing to see if it's into the system, we would go through all the proper notifications and things that we're allowed to do through DEP, depending on, without getting into specifics of what people would do to try to stop it. Overall, it is a good idea to get involved, go through the proper channels. It is illegal to discharge those things into the system itself. So we would use whatever remedies we have.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Blackmer.
Just to clarify, this is for the study, which will presumably produce some recommendations. This is the first step.
Yes.
Then we have to figure out how we're going to fund the actual improvements.
Correct.
Thank you. Further questions? One more. Counselor LaForest.
Through the chair to the mayor, Mr. Canales, just one slightly on and off agenda question. Are any of these properties known to be discharging sewage into the river, or has there ever been a study that's determined that we've rectified older homes that may be inappropriately discharging sewage?
That I'm aware of, but you might.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that we're aware of, but.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Hearing no further questions, we have a motion and a second to adopt the order. This is a roll call vote.
Wagner,
Yes.
Bona,
Yes.
Harpen,
Yes.
LaForest,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Moulton,
Yes.
Sweeney,
Yes.
Wilkinson,
Yes.
Hopkins.
Yes. That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to paper number 11,839, Mayor's Communication number 3, requesting time for an update on the status of the Public Safety Building. Without objection, we'll file the communication, and Mayor, if you would.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to say a few prefatory comments, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who's been managing this project on the city side. We did do a high-level overview of this in early December, and I know there was a desire to have a little dialogue on the subject, so we want to provide that opportunity. One thing I do want to say, and Mike will just acknowledge this in his remarks, is our attorney is aware of this issue. So if we're not able to give a full and complete answer, just understand we're giving you what we can at this time.
All right, so first I'm going to walk the council through the project and the process that we've gone through. A notice to proceed was issued on Monday, August 5th, after review of the contractor's references and to ensure that they had DCAM certification. The completion was required to be done within 75 days of said date, which would be October 18th, 2019. Of course, with a roof project, that's contingent on weather and would be extended or shrunk depending on conditions. The contractor was able to mobilize and began construction on September 30th, 2019. The contractor had originally projected approximately a 4 to 5 week project to substantial completion. Work proceeded until October 24th, 2019. We then ran into an issue and no work was performed on the site for 34 days. A meeting was scheduled on December 11th, 2019. I believe that was the day after the council was informed of what was happening, to discuss the schedule and how we get the project back on task in order to obtain substantial completion. On January 6, 2020, after failure to meet the schedule that we had laid out, we issued a notice of default to the contractor and to their bond company. On January 10th, we followed up with a conference call between the City of North Adams, legal counsel, the contractor, and their bond company. And on January 13th, we held a meeting with the representatives of Firestone. Firestone is the company that manufactures the membrane roof, and they are the ones that would ultimately be responsible for the 20-year warranty on the roof. And this was done in order to get an initial inspection and identify any deficiencies. If at any point we are unable to obtain the warranty through the process, and that we would still have our rights to act underneath the notice of default. The issues that we've come across is we have had some water damage, as I'm sure some counselors and individuals in the community have heard. The contractor has brought in a vendor that specializes in this to inspect the damage and is verbally committed to replacing the cabinets, sheetrock, and insulation in the day room, plus make any repairs in the radio room where we had water leakage into the building. Due to the water damage, we are preparing to do what's called core sampling, which is taking areas where the water penetrated into the roof, take samples to make sure that the insulation and other facilities in the ceiling are not saturated with water. In addition, we are proposing that thermal imaging is done so you can identify the entire roof. Thermal imaging will give you a view of where heat loss is happening, and if insulation becomes wet, what happens is it loses its R factor, and therefore thermal imaging will give us a great look at what is happening with the roof and make sure that we have a roof that is working properly. Our priorities right now are to establish a watertight seal for the remainder of the winter season. From there, then, the city with Bradley Architectures will be reviewing the construction document conditions, compiling a list of outstanding and critical work that is needed in order to obtain substantial completion and guarantee that we can get our 20-year warranty. Any of the remaining work to meet these conditions will be performed in the spring of 2020. And that is where we stand at this point.
Questions from the council? Okay, Councilor LaForest, Harpen, and Moulton.
I have many questions. I don't know where to begin, but I'll start with one. Through the chair to Mr. Canales and or the mayor, so is the same contractor that failed to show up at the job site for 34 days going to be completing the work in the spring, or is the city responsible for finding a new contractor to complete this failed project?
As of right now, we are working with the current contractor in order to make sure it's all met. A notice of default to the bond company has effects throughout their ability to gain bonds for other projects. So it is one of those things that, as of the notice of default, we've seen an increase in the amount of work that's been done. And well, right now we are just making our priorities as substantial completion and then warranty. If we can meet those and make sure that the roof itself through thermal imaging and the rest has been done correctly, then that's how we will proceed.
So just a follow-up question. Is it typical, well, let's acknowledge that this is not a typical situation. So for a failed or abandoned roof project like this, is the industry standard to use thermal imaging to determine whether or not insulation, is now saturated with water and presumably going to produce mold? Because the council, it's not a criticism of you or the mayor. I know neither of you, intended for the contractor to abandon this project, but the council appropriated $500,000 to essentially put a new roof on the building because there was significant water damage from deferred maintenance, and there was also a mold problem. So we've spent $500,000 and we're back to square one. So my question is this the industry standard, and is this going to ensure that the building is not going to continue to be hazardous to the police and firefighters that use it?
Normally, this is not something you would normally do, but in the case of questions that have risen because of the work that's been done, this is the standard that you would use, core sampling and thermal imaging, to guarantee that the work is done and has been done properly. It was recommended first from our architects that we have these done, and then on the call with the contractor, they also offered reassurances to do core sampling and thermal imaging. The city will be insisting that we are the ones that select the core sampling company and the thermal imaging company.
Councilor Harpen.
Through the chair to Mr. Canales, please, or the mayor, whoever. I do have several questions here, so I'm just going to put them all out there and then you can answer them. So my first question is, you mentioned that the contractor ran into an issue back in October. I think you said October 23rd, and they didn't return. What was the issue exactly?
No, the issue was they failed. If it's all right, could I answer them?
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
That the contractor stopped work and did not pick up the work for 34 days, despite calls and concerns raised by us and our architects. We have yet to have they haven't really given a reason.
Okay, so that you have no idea, there wasn't an incident there or,
Nope.
or accident or anything?
It
Okay.
was a failure to perform.
Okay. So My second question is do you expect any additional charges? Is the 500,000 that we submitted and approved, is that going to be enough to cover this roof?
Yes. We are both into liquidated damages, which is they're beyond their construction time, and we will be insuring that all costs and the rest that are going to be minused off of the contract agreement.
Okay. And just one more question. Before we hired the contractors, did we go out and seek recommendations for their work?
Yes, and they had DCAM certification. Now, DCAM is any project that's over a certain dollar amount is required to have DCAM certification, which means you've gone through a rigorous process to be approved by the state to actually do this type of work in a municipal setting and a state setting. DCAM, if you don't have DCAM certification, you cannot bid on public jobs. So they both reference checks and DCAM certification was in place at the time. So there was no reason. They were the low bidder, and they met all the qualifications, and there were no red flags.
Thanks. Councilor Bolton?
Yes, through the chair to whoever wants to answer. I was kind of watching this project the whole time, and I found it very interesting because our parish had a roof probably 2 or 3 times the size, and went along fine, got finished, and it's been done. I have family members who work close by, and they would call me and say, man, there's stuff blown all over the parking lot, hitting stuff, flying around. Other people would come to me and tell me, again, I said, I'm not a counselor, go talk to the mayor or get a counselor and bring it before council to see what's going on. So I just found it kind of unusual. And I had talked to people who were, worked in the department, what was going on, that things were still leaking and whatnot. My question is, knowing someone that works at a local college, and when they have projects like that, they have a clerk of works. So when these things start going wrong right away, why isn't it picked up on? And who, if anybody, is the clerk of works on site to bring notification to the city that we have some major problems here? I mean, not showing up for 34 days, being in business, in my business, if I didn't perform for 34 days, there would be a problem, and like anybody else in business. So when there's something that big involved, I had concerns because of similar project going on, things that were going on, and nothing was done. So is there somebody who was responsible for that project the day it started to watch it, whether it be an engineer, whoever certifies stuff like that, to make sure things are going well? Was that done?
Yes, we had contracted with Bradley Architecture. They would be doing 2 to 3 days a week visits on the site. Visits usually short in the morning, afternoon. This was considered to be a small, flat roof, easy project that should have gone much smoother than it did. When we realized that we had issues at the site, we assigned Foster Lewis as the clerk of the work. And he began in the beginning of October on site daily, reviewing what was going on. And that led us to some of the concerns that we have with the project.
Okay. I still think the ball was dropped, and I think all future projects work more smoothly.
All right. Councilor Blackmer?
I just want to remind people that municipal finance and municipal procurement is not the same as nonprofit or corporate. We have prevailing wages we have to follow. We have very specific laws about it, and sometimes it's easy to second guess what other people have done. On that note, I do have a question. The council previously approved $500,000 for this project. I know that we're not going to have to incur any additional expenses because those are their fault. They pay it. They have to cover it. Are we getting any kind of discount or was there any kind of agreement for not meeting dates that the price has been reduced? And I don't know if you can answer this or not. Have we paid all the final invoices or no?
We have not paid all the invoices at this point. We're holding them because of lack of sufficient progress. And as far as the other things, those are subject to the final negotiation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Who had their hand up first? Councilor Bona?
Through the chair, is it fair to say that their DKM certification and obviously their bonding is going to be affected by this?
This is something we can't say.
Okay.
Counselor Harpen and then LaForest.
Okay, through the chair to the mayor. I know you said that they're going to cover the fees and any additional expenses that we had in the contract. Does that cover our legal fees? Because it seems like we got some legal fees involved in here as well.
Subject to negotiation. That would be subject to negotiation, final negotiation as well.
Counselor LaForest.
Through the chair to the mayor, Mr. Canales, when will the IR testing be done? Will that be done immediately, or will that be done in the spring?
So in discussing it, one of the concerns is that if the roof membrane itself is frozen or anything's frozen, that it might be optimum to do it in the spring. So there are some ideas of how to do this. We're putting that currently together as to it. The sampling would happen sooner because the sampling is actually cutting into the membrane and pulling samples out. We'll probably evaluate from them how urgent it is to do the thermal.
Thank you. One last. Go ahead.
So there would be a determination if mold were growing prior to the spring.
They would do the core sample and assess the condition of the roof.
And one other question, I'm sorry. And so now we have a membrane that has been punctured for $500,000. Is there any recourse for that?
Yeah.
The way these membrane roofs are, and they actually seal back up, they're actually done in strips, so they're sealed together anyways. Every roof drain, if you were up on the building, which I've been up on the building and saw all the numerous holes that have to be cut in it, and then how they're sealed with these industrial epoxies, that is the way that they have to do that. So as far as opening up all the drains, every little electrical, everything else that needs to be up there, they're constantly making holes and adjusting it, and the way it glues down in a system. There is no impact to the warranty or anything else as far as that, because it's designed to do that, so not an issue.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands up, Mayor, thank you for the information.
Thanks. Could I just say
Sure.
one quick comment in closing? I want to be really clear that Mike Canales has been the sober voice of reason in this project and has reined in my extreme frustration, particularly at this point. So the questions you're asking, the frustrations that you're bringing to the table are things that I have been working through from the time that this started to go off the rails, and we have been appropriately doing our due diligence at every step of the way. And this is the next stage of the process. And I do just want to reiterate that we have not waived at this point our right to act on any of this.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next order of business, Council Paper 11,840, communication from Councilor Harpen regarding the North Adams Pillar Art underneath Veterans Memorial Bridge. Without objection, we'll file the communication and move to the paper 11,840, an order authorizing a study in regards to the restoration of children's pillar art located at Route 2 Bridge under the Veterans Memorial Drive. Motion's in order to refer to general government with a return date of February 25th.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Whose motion was that?
Councilor Lamb's.
When was that? I didn't hear him
Oh,
make a motion.
no, I said so moved to what he recommended as a motion.
I recommended referring to general government. with a
Okay, so
return
you
date.
made the motion?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, I didn't
Okay.
make the motion. I recommended a motion. Councilor Lamb made the actual motion by saying so moved.
Okay, and who's the second?
I was.
Okay.
All right,
So
so,
Counselor Lamb made the motion,
correct.
and Counselor Wilkins second.
Seconded the motion, correct.
Okay.
And we're up for discussion.
Okay.
Would you like to begin the discussion?
Well, that was
Counselor
just
Harpen?
just an odd way to do things, but okay. Let me see how that works. So, Yeah, there's a communication here that was submitted from Counselor Harp and myself and Counselor LaForest regarding the North Adams Children's Pillar Art. And I'm just going to read you the communication to start things off. I know there's a lot of people here that came earlier that spoke in the gallery. There's other people here that didn't speak that are supporting this initiative. And I'm sure there's counselors that would like to speak as well. So I'm just going to read the communication, and then we can go from there. So to the North Adams City Council regarding the North Adams Children's Pillar Art. As we begin the celebration of our 125th anniversary, it is important to remember the history of the men, women, and children who labored and sacrificed to build the diverse city of North Adams we know and love today. Those of us who have families have been in North Adams for multiple generations have cherished memories, family stories, pictures, and artifacts of how North Adams grew through both our triumphs and our tribulations. Our rich history is what has made us what we are today. We should all be proud to remember and share with new residents and all that visit the city in the region. The North Adams Children's Pillar Art, documenting the history of children labor in our many mills, was art created by our public school children on city-owned property in 2012. This art represented a deep history of North Adams and the printing industry that built what is now the Mass MoCA complex. One of its primary intentions was to create a pathway between the community and Mass MoCA, the past meeting the future, the joining together of people of different cultures and generations that share the same city. In May of 2017, with no documented communication, the children's art was painted over with gray paint by Mass MoCA because the museum believed the children's art disrupted the sound art installed in 1998. There is no official city contract with any artist, and the children's pillar art was there for 5 years before it was painted over. Despite significant support from the North Adams community to restore the pillar art, as evidenced by the appeals to the city, its Public Arts Commission, and Mass MoCA, there still has been no resolution to this concern and no attempt to determine if the gray paint can be removed without damaging the children's artwork. The artwork was sealed with an anti-graffiti coating. As the legislative body of the city, it is our responsibility to listen to our constituents and act on their behalf to resolve this grievance. Due to the 2.5-year failure to resolve this disappointing loss of public art created by our public school children, we request the City Council take action to resolve the matter fairly, timely, and with transparency through the order that was just submitted and called to submit to general government by Council President Hopkins. So within this communication, there's also a summary of attempted resolutions by the artists. They have communicated to Mass MoCA. They have sent applications into the Public Arts Commission, and they have also had meetings with the mayor. They also have a petition which was signed by over 400 people. I know that some are not from North Adams, but the majority are, specifically from North Adams and with addresses on here. And even if, you know, some of them aren't, this is still a community. Adams is still part of our community. Clarksburg is still part of our community. These are people that worked in the mills as well and have cherished North Adams and shop and work and play here. So, you know, their voices are important as well. So that is the communication, and
Other counselors then.
that's it.
Counselor LaForest.
So I was happy to join with Councilor Harpin in presenting this to council, primarily because there has been a disjointed approach by multiple parties, the city, Mass MoCA, and the artists, to resolve this issue. And truthfully, I don't agree 100% with Councilor Harpen, and we've gone back and forth about a couple of issues. Now, there don't appear to be any contracts between the city and the artist and the city and Mass MoCA. Councilor Harpen and I met with Joe Thompson, the director of Mass MoCA, yesterday, and he indicated that there was a contract between Mass MoCA and the artist, indicating that there would be a long-term or permanent exhibition. But that doesn't exist on the city side. The pillars are owned by the city. Now, in the gallery notes that were created in 1997, 1998, when this installation was first open to the public, there is an indication that this would be a long-term exhibit, not permanent, but long-term. And there is also a very poetic reference to the space under the pillars. And I'll read a sentence or two here. There's an explanation of the sort of machination of the sound and why it's artistic, and it's really a well thought out exhibition. It's quite complex. The one sentence is, quote, "The sound focuses one's attention on the majestic columns, the grand scale of the area, which combined with the droning, somehow sacral tones brings to mind a Gothic nave," end quote. So there was this intent on the part of the artist to incorporate the entire space into this installation. But again, that's not contractual and it's not codified. And when you look at any work of art, you are free to interpret that work of art however you choose. You're not bound by the intent of the artist. You're not bound by the consideration of the gallery notes, the palm card, and art can be interpreted in many different ways. Psychosocial components, socio-political components, economic demographics, the economy of the art, the value we place on the art, the value we place on the place of the art, learned behaviors, the physical environment. So many of you know that I sing. I went to opera school. I have what would be considered a piece of art in my voice. Well, that's open for disagreement, and I appreciate that. But the point I'd like to make is that my voice doesn't sound the same it did when I went to opera school 25 years ago. I don't look the same as I did when I went to school 25 years ago, but I can still sing, not as well and a little differently. I'll wrap up here in just a second. My point is that there is no contract. And so I'm actually going to motion to amend the motion that this be referred to the solicitor for a determination of precedence of the art, because the argument is that the harmonic bridge, is that it? Sorry, now thank you. Harmonic bridge was there first, and thus the paint or lack of paint that was on the pillars at the time has become the intellectual property of the artist, even though the pillars themselves belong to the city. And the argument is made, therefore, that the children, in painting on those pillars, which had become the intellectual property of the original artist, were in fact defacing that art. The counter-argument is that when Mass MoCA painted over those murals, that Mass MoCA was defacing and vandalizing the art that the children put in place. And so there has been this circular argument with no determination for the past several years.
Are you making a motion
So
to amend?
I would like to make a motion to amend the original motion to include referral to the city solicitor for determination of precedence.
And let me just be clear, to include that.
To include that, yes.
Both
It should also
go
go
to general government entities. Is there a second on Councilor
Second.
LaForest motion? We have a motion and a second. Discussion on the proposed amendment to refer to the city solicitor in addition to general government. Councilor Bona.
I actually, I do believe we need some answers from the solicitor on this, because there are those legal questions out, and I think Councilor LaForest hit on, something that it's hard for some people to grasp that those pillars were part of the original art. You know, they see a sound box and that's what they think was the art, and the other art isn't affecting it. And you know, when you go into museums, when you go, I mean, Mass MoCA itself, you go in, you see a room the size of a football field with a little piece of art in the middle of it, and that space around it is supposed to be part of the experience of that art, either through the space, the nothingness, whatever, but it makes you focus on the art. And the pillars themselves, you know, I tell people this, I said, if the pillars were painted with ocean fish and you were standing there hearing that sound, you're going to have a different interpretation of what that sound is supposed to mean. You're going to think that that sound must be ocean waves. You know, if I ring a bell just right here on its own, you're going to think, I hear a bell ringing, and that bell might mean something to you. But if all of a sudden I ring that bell and there's pictures of dinner and food around me, you're going to think it's a dinner bell. So the context of that art does affect it. When you look at other images of the artists that have done that piece, most of their work is done in very concrete, industrial-looking atmospheres. You don't see their work done. Now, I'm not defending it because, in the sense that I like it. I'm just saying we need a legal answer of, one, like you say, who has precedence? And, you know, I've heard the whispers that they do, you know, that the artists that are currently there have the right. There never has been any official specs. You did say there was a contract with MoCA, but like I say, not with the city. Interesting enough, there are murals that are downtown on city property that have contracts with MCLA and not with the city. So we could fall into the same issue here. So their art is then protected. We don't own the art. MoCA doesn't own the art. We own sort of the canvas under it, but we can't touch that. There have been lawsuits about that, and they could sue us. But what I haven't seen is anything officially from the artist saying, no, we want our art there. I mean, I think that would settle some stuff right there, because it's not, right now it seems to be the city against MoCA, but if the artists say we don't want that touched and there was no contract, we're in a very different predicament. So I think, so these were questions that I came up with, and the very first one was, and the reason why I'm bringing up this under this amendment, because possibly if it goes to general government, maybe general government should work on questions that should go to the solicitor, and those should maybe be answered first before it gets to the next steps, because if it comes back where the solicitor says they own it, you can't touch it, that sort of stops things right there. So one of the first questions is, does the city council have authority over art not owned by the city on public property, which was allowed by previous administration, executive office, to be installed without a contract? This would include removal and/or altering the art without the artist's permission. So again, if that came back and it said we do not have that authority, we're sort of done right there. The next question would, again, these are questions I would like to have a legal, a real opinion, not just hearsay. Can the city be required, or can the city council require communication and specifications from the artist involved in the above art that's been there for 14 years after it's been installed, since there is no information on record to this date? So again, their city has nothing official. This contract with MoCA and the artist, did you see it, by the way? I'm just through the chair. So we don't know what specifically that was. And then, can the artist specify a distance around their physical art to have no other art, landscape, or other elements besides the architecture and the materials that were there? And I feel to getting these answers are either going to say, yes, continue on, or no, you have to stop in your tracks. Because we could discuss this all day. I think the other thing we have to do is take the emotions out of this. I mean, the art itself, there's people who are very emotionally connected to it, and you have to look at it as it's not just children's art. You have to look at it, it's a piece of art, it's a piece of property. And while you may have been attached, and you know, I feel like every time people saying it's the children's, we're using it a bit as it's a guilt thing, you know, like big old bad MoCA went after children, and I don't think it probably would have mattered who did the art. They probably would have wanted it gray. So, and it did have 5 years, but those are things that I would like to see go to the solicitor. So I don't know if you should go to the solicitor along with general government, or general government should maybe first meet and come up with questions to give to the solicitor.
Thank you. I saw
Counselor Lamb and Counselor Moulton. I don't know which came first.
Flip a coin. Okay. So just to Counselor Bona's points there, I think also just for the public to be aware of why this is such a concern when it comes to the legality and the liability of these things. In recent history, and not identical to this case, because there will never be any identical cases when it comes to art. There's, in recent history, there's 5 cases where this has come up. Several are still in court, but there are 2 that have been found in recent history where the artist was the party that won those cases, one of which was over $1 million and one was over $6 million. Those cases are precedent for destroying art under the auspices of an act that went into play in 1990. And, again, I think this is why actually it does make a lot of sense for it to go to general government first to get the questions right, just to make sure that we're asking the right question, because something that can happen is we can tailspin and we can ask a lot of questions and spend a lot of money without actually getting the answers that we need to make a, very straightforward, legally supported decision as a council. So I think going to the committee to get the questions right makes a lot of sense.
Reminder that we're still discussing the amendment to add the recommendation to the city solicitor. Councilor
I
Moulton.
just wanted to reiterate, back that Councilor Forrest. I mean, I think it's been going on for years, bandied about. There's been a lot of hearsay, both sides. Bring it to the general government, have them get the questions, bring it to the city solicitor, and let's just put this thing to rest.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing,
So
on the
right
amendment.
now, we're voting the amendment, and the amendment is specifically what he said, like his particular one question. So if we vote yes, then that one question is what goes to the solicitor.
The amendment was to refer to the city solicitor. Was there specific language that you?
If I may, so my intention was, primarily, the big, overarching question is a determination of precedence. As Councilor Lamb pointed out, there are other, pending, here, I'll put it down. Pending litigation and cases that have been litigated, with a decision. My intent, isn't that it has to go to the solicitor with my amendment per se, but that the work of the general government does in fact be moved to the solicitor. So, I would concur with Councilor Bona that, general government committee should create a series of questions that should be forwarded to the solicitor. So, whatever the council's pleasure in that process.
Councilor Blackmark, please.
I would suggest that that the motion be, or the amended motion be, that it goes to general government and somewhere along the way, somebody determines questions. And that we get an opinion at some point before bringing it back from the city solicitor is what
You're
we're
talking
looking at.
about
Without
the amendment or
specific-
the original motion?
I think, no, the amendment is to also confer with the city solicitor regarding whatever.
I just want to be sure on what the language of the amendment is, so that as this work proceeds, everybody's clear on what we
We've
intended.
overcomplicated it.
Councilor Lamb.
Just for the record, could the clerk please read what?
Okay, so currently, the motion is to refer to general government, postpone to the second meeting in February, but we also want to amend it to read, refer to city solicitor as well. Is that correct? Something like that?
Close enough.
Is that close enough?
That's the
Okay.
intention,
Near
yes.
that.
Right, then I'd like to vote on the amendment. The amendment being to include in the original motion a referral to the city solicitor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Back to the original motion, which now reads, refer to general government with a return date of February 25th and to include a referral to the city solicitor. Continue discussion.
I would like to suggest another amendment, and that is, I still feel in our ordinances that this is a responsibility of the Public Arts Commission. So I would like to see a general government actually do either it goes also to the Public Arts, or I'd rather see a joint meeting with the Public Arts Commission. I spoke with the chairperson today, and these are some of her comments. You know, anything that happens with these columns regarding the art or the absolute under the purview of the Public Arts Commission, I'm really ready to fix this. And, you know, and I'm ready to get this resolved. And that's from the Public Arts Commission chairperson. So I feel like we're either going to bypass them, but at some point it's going to go to them or should go to them by our ordinances, but to just have a joint meeting and have them there with us anyway.
Okay, is that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, so a motion to include the Public Arts Commission.
Is there a second? Second came from Councilor LaForest. Discussion on this amendment. Councilor Blackmer.
Well, my thought is that we ought to, I mean, it's been in their court for 2.5 years, I know. And in full disclosure, my husband is on the Public Arts Commission, has been on since they established it. So I'm familiar with this particular issue, even though I haven't been on the city council for the last 2 years. But I think we need to get some legal opinions, and I don't think we need to have a joint meeting of the Public Arts Commission to do that on this particular issue. You're also talking about scheduling schedules for 8 people, and I would rather have something to give them before I had a joint meeting or something. I mean, if basically if they say, if the attorneys say there's precedent, you really shouldn't do this, it's going to cost $1 million, and these are the things, there's really no point in going forward and having more meetings and meeting with them is my thought. So I'm not a big fan of having, until we have some legal opinions, having a joint meeting with them. They've already talked about this ad nauseum.
Councilor Wilkinson.
Well,
and then Harpen.
it doesn't so much have to do with the amendment, but we've been banging this thing around for a while. There's a matter of practicality here. What we're looking at is an order authorizing a study in regards of what we're talking about. We can authorize all the studies we want. The city council doesn't have a budget. So we have no money to pay for a study. The money would have to come from the administration.
That is off topic. We're talking about the amendment to refer to include PAC in the discussions. I understand where you are. That might.
Oh, wait.
Do you understand? Okay, understood. Councilor Harpen.
Okay. I just want to mention a few things. First, both of these, the original sound installation and then also the children's pillar art, both were done prior to the PAC even being established.
Is this relevant to the motion to amend?
It sure is.
Okay, great.
Yes, because it's about the PAC, right?
Terrific.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, what I'm saying is, both of those installations were done before the PAC was even established, okay? Also, when I received the PAC timeline from the chair of the PAC, on here she has notes that say, per the February meeting notes, the PAC determined that executing the proposed test strip was outside their purview. So they've already determined that it was outside their purview. And I would like to say that the artist did submit an application in November of 2018, and that application cannot be found. And so they were asking them to submit another application. So, you know, this has just been going on a long time. I know that there were a lot of changes in the commission and there were things going on, but things have not been resolved there, and it appears by their notes it's not something that they believe they need to resolve. So yeah, I would say sending it to the general government would be, you know, the optimal, most effective approach.
Councilor LaForest.
I would agree with both Councilor Blackmer and Councilor Harpen for the reason that much of this occurred before the creation of the Public Arts Commission, and you know, certainly respecting the fact that according to the you know, their own notes, this much of this work is outside their purview. Additionally, I think given that the Public Arts Commission has other work to do, and that this has sort of straddled several iterations of the Public Arts Commission and the ordinances that govern them, that we really should just have this go through general government to the solicitor. I would encourage members of the Public Arts Commission to be present at that meeting but I don't know that, as Councilor Blackmer pointed out, working through 8 people to schedule a meeting is, the most efficient way to do this. And certainly they should be included once the solicitor has returned an opinion on the questions from the General Government Committee, as it is an action of the council rather than the commission.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment to include PAC?
I'll just rescind it.
Okay, motion's rescinded. Back to the original motion then, which is to refer to general government with a return date of February 25th and to include a referral to the city solicitor as part of that. Any further discussion? Councilor Wilkinson, here's where you come in.
I'm back. No, it's just a matter, we can go through this whole thing, and I'm all for restoring the pillars, just so you know. It's just a matter of practicality. An order authoring a study. So we go through general government, and we go to the city solicitor, which is certainly going to cost the city money, but the council's allowed to do that. We have a budget for that. And then it comes back here, and then everybody in the room authorizes a study. Who's going to fund it? We cannot fund it. So it's going to get sent back to the mayor's office for funding. Maybe we should find out where the mayor weighs in on this before we go through all
I think
this.
getting ahead of ourselves here.
No, I don't think we are at all.
Okay.
I'm looking in the crystal ball.
Okay. I didn't know we had one.
Oh,
Councilor
works
Harpen.
Yeah, I would consider this to be similar to an engineering study, and we do have a budget for engineering, and I believe there is still money in there.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? We have, I'm sorry, I can't look in both directions. Councilor Blackman.
I just want to say, if somebody can't make the general government meeting, because I know we're all busy, if you do have questions, I know Counselor Bona was trying to write as he was talking, but I probably missed. So if you could shoot me the questions you have, we might all come up with them on our own, but I don't want to miss anybody if I'm not here,
Okay,
if you can't be at the meeting.
And Councilor LaForest.
So I just want to respond to Councilor Wilkinson. This is an ongoing issue that is going to continue to affect the city, either in terms of the pillars or future installations that are a collaboration of Mass MoCA, the city, MCLA, the public school system, and it is an area of law that is evolving, and we would do well to make a small investment now to have a better understanding of the city's obligations regarding public art.
Thank you very much. Councilor Moulton.
Quick question. I mean, if this could be ended quickly. This could go to the lawyer, and there could be case law, and it could be done. So I think we got to go through the process, go there, see what turns out, and go with it from there. We may not need studies, we may need extra money. He just may come back and say, you can go do it, or you can't do it. And we got our answer.
Thank you. Councilor Bona.
The order that we've amended and added to go into the general government, it not only though discusses the test, it actually says if the test passes, we're approving that the pillars be restored.
But that is not the order. That's not the motion before us. The
Oh,
motion
that's-
before us is only to refer to general government and the city solicitor.
Okay, so this one,
We're not voting. We're not voting
made-
on the order tonight. We're referring this matter to general government.
Because the original order, I thought, the way it was read, is that this was the, although as you, all right, I think you're right, the way you said it, you just said general government.
Yes.
It was not this.
Correct.
Okay.
Last discussion. Councilor Lamb.
Just
Sorry.
through the chair briefly in response to that. So that is what's being referred, but just like with anything that we refer to committee, it can be altered in committee, it can be changed in committee, it can be recommended for this, that, or the other thing. So even though that's the actual text that is being referred, it's the topic of the text that's being discussed. So I think it's well within that document is the actual paper.
Councilor LaForest.
So I just want to clarify, I actually wrote the order, and I specifically used the word may rather than shall. So if it may be restored, please understand that, I understand that a restoration of the pillars may be exorbitant.
But shall appears twice in this. And
Well,
shall
yeah,
is-
but
shall is
it may be,
unambiguous.
Well, it may be restored, and if so, if it so may be restored. So I think there's a loophole enough
To
there.
work on the language then.
Okay, General
All right.
Government Committee can take care of that.
Yes.
But my intention, I understand, that if this is going to run into the tens and perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's beyond the means of the city, at which point we need to have a different conversation. And Councilor Wilkinson is right in that regard. It may just not be affordable for the city to proceed, but we do need to get these initial questions answered through the solicitor.
Thank you, then. We have a motion to refer to general government with a return date of February 25th and to refer to city solicitor. This is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move next to committee reports and minutes. Hearing any? It's early in the year, so I didn't really expect any. Then we move on to licenses. We have 3 before us tonight. An application for a license to drive a taxi received from RJ's Taxi and Lori M. Spencer. Motions in order to grant the license.
Move to grant.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Application for a license to drive a taxi received from RJ's Taxi for Lisa Walters of 159 Eagle Street, North Adams.
Move
Motions
to
in order
grant.
to grant.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And application for a license to drive a taxi received from RJ's Taxi for Abilio Rodriguez of 38 Meadow Street, North Adams. Motion to approve, anyone?
Move to grant.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. We are now in open forum. If anyone in the gallery wishes to speak, you have 2 minutes. And if you would approach the microphone again, state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Ed Morandi, West Shaft Road. First of all, I'd like to apologize to Jason LaForest. Councilor LaForest, your question took me aback. I mean, I was really surprised, but you're on the ball.
Thank you.
Yes. I did have a few things to say about paper 117704, and too bad. Oh, Michael's still here. Mr. Canales, can I question or no? All right, I just want to know, I'd just like to point out, rather, that the study was done in 1999, and it says here for your $71,000, you're going to get a look at disconnecting private and illegal services to the sewer system. There's been illegal connections. How does one make an illegal connection to the sewer system? And if it's been since 1999, why hasn't it been rectified? Also, to repipe 13 catch basins to connect to storm drains is going to cost the city a lot of money. I've been in the business before, and I'm telling you something. You not only have to dig up the pipes or close them off, but you're going to have to connect to the storm sewer, which may be 50, 60, 70, 100 feet away. I don't know because some of those pipes in this city are over 100 years old. Also, I'll get back to paper 11840, and I can't question, but maybe somebody here who hears that C underneath the bridge, can they raise their hands? No? All right. You have documentations on this? Somebody just said, go ahead and paint the pillars, and they did it, and now we're discussing this for an hour and a half on what we can do, send it to council, send it to lawyers. You people, again, you people are the lawmakers of the city. If they don't have a contract, if it's not on written paper.
Thank you, sir.
My 2 minutes are up?
It went fast, didn't it?
Pardon?
It went fast, didn't it?
You were always fast, Paul. I gotta admit.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Mr. Smith, and then Mr. Smith, and then Mr. Wilson. Yeah. Name and address for the record, please.
My name is Joseph Smith. So I just had a couple of follow-up comments after hearing Counselor speak. I think someone should just talk to the sound installation artist and ask them directly if they can't possibly agree to short-term restoration. Sometimes the main problem is not talking directly to a party. You seem very worried about a lawsuit from the sound installation artists. I would like to thank the pillar artists that they are nice enough people that we don't need to fear a lawsuit from them. My understanding from the pillar artists is that a test is rather simple. A complicated study seems like an accidental mischaracterization. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Robert Smith, 140 Pleasant Street, North Adams. Here we are, a new year. First council meeting this year. 3 new members on this council. And we wasted so much time discussing something that didn't need to be discussed any longer. I understand Councilor Harpin likes the history of that artwork. That's fine. But we're living in the present. And we have to work on things for our city that is for the benefit of most of the citizens in our city. We can't waste time with stuff like this. We got to go forward. We need to raise revenue. We need to lower our expenses. We have to make sure we have reserve funds in our budget in case of any emergency coming up. So this is just nonsense, and it should be stopped.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wilson, you were next.
My name is Eric Wilson, and I live at Brighton Hill, and I represent people with disability. I wanted to say to you guys that we're doing, on the disability board of the city, we're doing good progress, and we're getting there. And so I just wanted to say about the art on the pillars. I think it's kind of simple of this situation. We don't want to, like Keith Bowen said, we don't want to discriminate against anybody, people with disability or not disability. We're trying to work together. Someone, I think Matt Mocha thought that was the bridge, it was their property. It's not. I think it's the North Adams responsibility to keep that up, and the state. I think they decided to paint it because it did need painted for a long time, and it looked nice, but they shouldn't paint over the art. That was kind of stupid. I would never do that. Anybody have any common sense around here? I'm not trying to criticize or anything. I love this state. I'm glad I'm doing the representation, and especially make sure we have handicap accessible around the city too. I see it's happening, but we need more. Especially near that bridge, that parking lot does not have disability, wheelchair, handicap sign there. That should be there too. So thank you for listening to me, and God bless you, and I know you're going to make the right decision.
Thank you. Mr. Yeski.
Yeski, 62 Chase Avenue, North Adams. This parking issue, I've noticed that the Kmart Plaza hasn't been used that very much on any events. And if you're going to have quarter meters, or are you going to pay from a cell phone, which would be which way? Because there are parking lots that are more used than what that is. On the other hand, on the west end of town, I've noticed last week that they ripped the old roof off the Price Chopper building, and they're putting a new roof on there. And congratulations to you 3 councilors.
Thank you. Mr. Sapienza.
Yes, Brian Sapienza, 113 Pleasant Street. I want to thank Councilor LaForest for putting the pillar art matter in perspective, understanding that there was an original installation and it was painted over by the Children's Art and it's subsequently painted over by Mocha. Yes, it's agreed that it needs to get resolved pretty soon. I agree with the going to General Government Committee meeting. I would like to be present at the meeting if possible, just to listen to what has to be said. But yes, I do think that we need a legal opinion, because I have read of cases where this can potentially cost the city thousands, if not millions of dollars in lawsuits if it isn't resolved properly. So we need to go through the proper channels. And again, thank you, Councilor LaForest, for putting that in perspective for us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, sir. If you'd approach the microphone, name and address for the record.
My name's Jason Smith. No relation to these fellas.
Okay.
I'm just trying to be more active in the community and just get to know what's going on. So I've been trying to be around. I think Mr. LaForest's question to you about the roof. I've worked 25 years in the commercial roofing industry. That will pass its inspection the day of the inspection. It'll probably leak 6 years down the road after the inspection because of the core samples. They do patch over it. You can't guarantee that that guy built it back up so it doesn't create a pocket. You can't guarantee really anything after that point. So I think that's a very valid point. Mr. Wilkinson, it
Excellent.
seems the cost, or Councilor Wilkinson, sorry, it seems the cost of testing this art is an issue. We have all these fine MCLA student artists. Why couldn't we get the school to test it and give them credits and pay for it that way? Because, I mean, that's a point. MCLA, we don't do anything in the city. And I'm a student. I know we go to Williams and stuff like that. And I think this is a great opportunity to fix that. You know, let Trailblazers get some credit.
Thank you very
Oh,
much.
and 55 Whitman Street, sorry.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. All right. If nothing else, then we'll move on to liaison updates and counselors' concerns. Counselor Wilkinson.
I have a counselor's concern. You going to do liaison up first?
I don't. Do we have any liaison updates? No. Go ahead.
All right. At our next meeting, we have to make a difficult decision on Sullivan School. We're going to either decide to sell it for $1 or not. I had mentioned some time earlier that I thought it would be very important for all the counselors to actually get a tour of the school to see its present condition. It's had a fire, it's been vandalized, it's had water damage. We don't know if it's worth $1 or whether it's worth $50,000, so we don't have no idea what it's worth. And the council shouldn't make that decision without at least a tour of the school. Now, that's why I'm bringing this up in counselors' concerns. This subject was not on our agenda tonight, so it's not something that we could do in open debate. However, a committee of the council can call a meeting anytime they want with the proper notice. And I just think it's important that all the counselors have a tour of the school before we vote in 2 weeks. So I've talked to the chairman of the finance committee, and Marie Harpin, and she also thinks it's a good idea. So the finance committee will be posting a meeting sometime before the next council meeting for anybody, public certainly welcome because it's an open meeting, to take a tour of the school, and I hope you all come. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Counselor Moulton.
Yes. It's great to be back again, I gotta tell you. This body does a lot of things, as we see, from art to taxes to finances to many things. One thing I've always been especially concerned is public safety. I mean, I think that's our first and foremost thing to address. A couple years ago, I can remember, I believe it was Nick Mantello did a photo above the factory on Union Street. And I was shocked. I mean, you look at it from the outside, you got a wall, but it was completely open. And I talked to somebody back then, and I guess the city or somebody had an engineering study said, well, you know, it's okay. My niece, in the past month or so, one night was coming home, and there was a large amount of bricks in the road, and quite a bit more on the sidewalk. And I didn't hear much on it, and I was kind of wondering what was going on. But yet, when we had a church 3-4 years ago, a few bricks fell. Holy heck broke loose. Streets were blocked off, emergency order to take it down. You got to pay for it, and the whatnot. So my concern with that, with bricks falling down, you got Beaver Street 2 miles up the road where we had a ledge fall down. And for probably 3 or 4 years, they had barriers blocking one side of the road off, which the state engineer said we should do, and that was there thousands of years. Now that's been remediated, it's 2 lanes again. But we have an open sidewalk. Just 2 weeks ago, I was reading in the paper in New York, a piece of building fell on a woman and killed her. So we've got open sidewalks there. I wonder about the liability, and even if there was, engineers say it's okay, if you had a minor little earthquake, there is nothing supporting that wall. You've got wind, rain. What would happen if a tractor trailer came down and hit that building? Would it go down like a domino? I don't know. That concerns me. I drive by it, and I went up again today and looked at it. Very unsettling. I'll probably be bringing a paper forward to look into that, have public safety, and go forward with something like that, because I think it's very concerning, and it's a big, big liability. So
Thank you.
that's all. Thank you.
There were 2 over here. Anybody want first crack at it? Counselor Harpen.
Okay.
I always like the last word.
Never knew that about you.
I want to hear you sing.
So, through the chair, hopefully to Mr. Canales, I was hoping to ask the mayor a question. Back in 2018, we established a recreational marijuana cannabis ordinance for the city of North Adams. And over the last couple of years, I know there's been some talk about some possible shops popping up in North Adams. As you know, other towns and cities have made some substantial tax gains from these. So I just want to get maybe a basic overview of what's going on with some prospective shops in North Adams.
Can I answer that
Well,
for one of them?
if you have
If-
information
if-
to offer, sure. Mr. Canales, I don't know if you're prepared to answer a question about that tonight, or if it's something we can just ask you to come back with. Okay, let's do that. Can
I
you
was just
answer the
gonna-
question?
Yeah, I can
Okay.
answer some of it. They
Okay.
applied and were approved by the planning board in December of 2018. They were approved of 2018. It's now in their lap. They were approved over for where the Friendlies was, over Price Chopper. And then they have to go on and do what they're gonna do. Sometimes people look into it and they look at the market and they decide it's not worth the expense, or they get held up at the state. But I do know that it was approved, because I know there was some pushback saying the city of North Adams is behind the times, all these people are doing it. You have in actuality, somebody applied and was approved by the planning board. They just have to move forward with whatever they're gonna do, if they're going to.
Is this relevant
Yeah,
to
I
the same
just
question?
wanted another piece to it too. I know that there's been at least 3 that have done their public meetings that they have to do as part of the CCC process. They have to have an open public forum, and there's been at least 3 of those that have happened in the last 2 years. I know one of them was the Friendlies one, but the other 2 haven't had a physical presence as of yet.
I would still prefer a written summary from the mayor or
If
from
we can
Mr. Canales.
ask
That
for
would be
Thank you.
helpful.
Thank you.
And
On,
just add-
on cannabis or on something else?
Cannabis.
Oh, Are you okay to wait, Counselor LaForest, or would you rather go for it?
Fine.
Okay,
Although
Counselor.
we're
Yeah, we're getting into a
We're-
debate.
Yeah,
we're
we're
wading
not
into an area
deliberating,
we
we're
shouldn't be getting
clarifying.
into.
It was just, a question and hopefully a
Then
summary
I'm
from
gonna
the
ask Counselor
administration.
LaForest to pick up. Go ahead.
Okay, so in
It'll
my
be soon.
what?
It'll be soon.
Me
You're-
picking up or cannabis?
No, the cannabis, it'll be soon.
In my very long comments, on the topic of the pillar, I mentioned Mass MoCA, but I just want to reiterate, or iterate, I should say, that Joe Thompson was very gracious and, in fact, reached out to both Councilor Harpen and me, to meet on this topic, and provided a considerable amount of history, relative to this process. And, my good friend, Mr. Smith the Elder, I'll leave you out of it for now, young man, frequently says that we should do things for the children. And so I just want to, assure him that that was my concern in bringing this forward. I just want to say, Mass MoCA has been a very generous contributor to the community in spite of a lot of local criticism. My family has been here for multiple generations. I'm the first generation of my family that didn't work in a mill. I'm only the second generation of my family that speaks English as my first language, even though I speak French, as my, older relatives did when they were young. But Masmoka, hosts all of our school children on field trips in Kid Space. They host an amazing art exhibit of, local young artists from 11 or 12 high schools in the area. So they do a lot for the children of our community. And that's why someone said, maybe Mr. Sapienza, or one of the other counselors, we do need to remove the passion, from this process and just get some factual answers before we proceed. So I just want to, acknowledge the work that Masmoka does for the children of our community and thank, the counselors this evening for their concern and thoughtfulness on this agenda item.
Thank you. Okay,
Oh, no,
Councilor
no.
Blackmer
Okay.
had her hand
Okay.
up first.
I was
Maybe
gonna
you
say-
did. I get focused on who's speaking. I'm sorry.
So, the presidential primary is coming up in March, but because of our state law, you have to register to vote or change party by 21 days before, and I think that is February 12th.
And if you
And
are unenrolled, you have to enroll. Is that correct?
No.
I'm sorry?
What was the question?
If you are currently unenrolled,
You do not have to register in that party if you're
you
unenrolled.
can choose either.
Any ballot.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
Just
you.
wanted to bring that up, and then there's also early voting, which we can talk about at another meeting.
Okay, Councilor Bona?
Just, there was a comment made during open forum, and I think prior, saying how the council, that we are the law, and we can sort of say what is going to happen with this art. And I think it has to be understood that we are local law, and there is state and federal law that supersedes us. So we can make all the laws we want, but if federal law says this, our laws mean nothing, so.
Okay.
And very expensive tort law and damages that can be incurred if we misstep.
Correct.
All right, thank you. We have, oh, I'm sorry. You gotta
no
put your
worries.
hand up higher. Counselor Lamb.
Similar to Councilor Blackmer's note, the census is going to be happening very soon. I know I brought this up once in 2019. I'm bringing it up now in 2020 because it's even closer now. It'll be kicking off in 2 months. I believe March actually is when it starts. So they're still looking to hire people to help with the census. They need, I think, 800 people need to be hired in Berkshire County alone in order to conduct the census to completion, and we want to count everybody in the Berkshires, especially because that it has many thousands of dollars of impact on the region when people are not counted or when they are counted. If you are counted, those are dollars coming in. If they aren't counted, those are dollars missed. And that's from the federal and state level. So I think it's imperative to mention two things. One, make sure you fill out the census when that time is here. It'll have an online option this year, which is really great for accessibility. But also, if you're looking to support it and you're looking potentially to pick up some hours of work, very flexible schedules from what I hear in terms of being a census worker, and I believe they pay $18 an hour starting wages. So for folks that are looking for that involvement, please do seek it out and apply sooner rather than later so that they can onboard folks appropriately.
Did I see a hand? No? Okay, anything further? You have your hand up.
I have my hand up.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Yes, so if I could just also say to that point of the census, your local census should be coming any day. Watch for those. Please fill them out. Please bring them back. That's very important as well. In there, you'll see an insert that speaks about what Councilor Lamb just said.
All right, thank you. We have no correspondence. I would just like to thank everybody here tonight for a thoughtful discussion of a sensitive topic, and I'm sure we can find our way to the end. Motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?